Welcome back to our Storytime stream. Welcome back to my Storytime. Hi. Hello. Hi. I am joined by my slimy friends today. It's still quite hot. So they're gonna join me in my nice cool room, so that way we can all just hang out and be nice and cool all together. And yeah. Hi Cal, I saw your message. You are first. Hello. Thank you for being here. My friend. I'm so happy you're here. I'm still just kind of waking up. I have a big old cup of coffee right here with me. I have some water off to the side as well. And yeah, today we're gonna finish reading the Phantom Tollbooth. I'm pulling up my book reading app right now. Yes, I got everything already set up. But yeah. Hi, Tara! Good morning, Tara. I'm sorry you're not first, but you're second. And that's just as good in my book. Everyone that's here is number one in my book, so you don't have to worry about being first, because everybody is a winner here. Everyone wins here. Everyone wins here. Thank you for being here. I'm so happy you guys could be here. I'm so happy my friends could be here. I love you guys. I'm so happy you're here. Anyway, yes, so today we're going to be finishing up the Phantom Tollbooth. It'll probably be another long stream. We were about 55% away. 55% through the book. Oh my gosh, I haven't even started yet. I'm already coughing. It's one of those mornings. I have me a nice hot cup of coffee, so help soothe my throat, because last time I got a little bit raspy towards the end of the stream, and I had a very sore throat the day after, which made my doctors kind of concerned, but I had to explain to them that I'm a streamer and I do a lot of talking. I didn't tell them I was a VTuber because I'm pretty sure they didn't know what that was. So yeah, I just ended up telling them I do a lot of like video streaming, and I did a long stream yesterday and I kind of strained my throat. But I'm doing so much better. I have a nice warm drink. I have some water. I'm ready and good to go. And the last time we left off, we were introduced to Milo, a boy who basically had an existential crisis of life and living because he didn't feel anything was worth living for because everything was boring. Not that he was suicidal, it's just that life was pointless because nothing interested in him. And then he got this mysterious toll booth that got delivered to his house, and I have to assume that this kid is like a very young child, because he has like a really small, like, little electric car, not like electric, like an electric toy car that he can drive and stuff like that. But anyway, and yeah, so we get introduced to some of the colorful individuals of the world that he's traveled to. He went to Dictionopolis, a kingdom of words, and met some really queer characters there. And now after meeting all these people, he's sent on a quest to find the princess's rhyme and reason in order to help balance out the kingdoms that he has been visiting. And yeah, along with his watchdog companion Talk, they've been setting out, and a friend, Mr. Humbug. They've been setting out to try to find the princesses. And currently they are in a town where there is no sound, and he has to find a way to get some sound in order to help release the people of this soundless town to, from their curse of having no sound, because their sound wizard decided that she didn't want to hear any more noises because it got annoying. So yeah, let's see what happens next. Let's see, chapter 13, Unfortunate Conclusions. With his mouth shut tight, and his feet moving as fast as thoughts could make them, Milo ran all the way back to the car. It was great excitement when he arrived, as Talk raced happily down the road to greet him. The humbug personally accepted all congratulations from the crowd. "Where is the sound?" someone hastily scribbled on the blackboard, and they all waited anxiously for the reply. Milo caught his breath, picked up the chalk, and explained simply, "It's on the tip of my tongue." Several people excitedly threw their hats into the air. Some shouted what would have been a loud hurrah, and the rest pushed the heavy cannon into place. They aimed it directly at the thickest part of the fortress wall, and packed it full of gunpowder. Okay. Milo stood on tiptoe, leaned over into the cannon's mouth, and parted his lips. The small sound dropped silently into the bottom, and everything was ready. In another moment, the fuse was lit and sputtering. I hope no one gets hurt, thought Milo, and, before he had time to think again, an immense cloud of gray and white smoke leapt from the gun, and along with it, so softly that it was hardly heard, came the— Ah! Wait! No! Not yet! Hold on, hold on, hold on! Lemmy's being bad today. He's already started. Lemmy! You can't. Okay, so funny thing. Lemmy has been weirdly, not, Lemmy's been weirdly jealous of the slimes lately. Like, he thinks I'm not giving him any attention lately, so he's been making lots of noise lately. Phone ringing, doorbell sounds, like construction noises. It's been so weird lately. I think he's starting to feel neglected because the slimes are new pets, but I have to keep reminding him that Lemmy is Lemmy, and I always loved Lemmy. But the slimes are new pets, and they need to get used to being here. They need to get used to being here. I think he's slowly warming up to them. He's allowing them to be here, but you know, I think he really just really wants attention. So you know, I'm gonna try to give Lemmy as much attention as I can. Sorry about that. Okay, let's continue. Okay, let's continue. I hope no one gets hurt, thought Milo, and before he had time to think again, an immense cloud of gray and white smoke leapt from the gun, and along with it, so softly it was hardly heard, came the sound of— but it flew towards the wall for several seconds in a high, lazy arc, and then struck ever so lightly just to the right of the big door. For an instant there was an ominous stillness, quieter and more silent than ever before, as if even the air was holding its breath. And then, almost immediately, there was a blasting, roaring, thundering smash, followed by a crushing shatter, bursting crash, as every stone in the fortress came toppling to the ground, and the vaults burst open, spilling the sounds of history onto the wind. Every sound that had ever been uttered or made, from way back to when there were none, to way up to where there were too many, came hurtling out of the debris in a way that sounded as though everyone in the world was laughing, whistling, shouting, crying, singing, whispering, humming, screaming, coughing, and sneezing all at the same time. There were bits of old speeches floating around, as well as recited lessons, gunshots from old wars, babies' cries, auto horns, waterfalls, electric fans, galloping horses, and a great deal of everything else. For a while there was total and deafening confusion, and then almost as quickly as did come, and all the old sounds disappeared over the hills in search of their new freedom, and things were normal again. The people quickly went about their busy, talkative business, and, as the smoke and dust cleared, only Milo, Talk, and the Humbug noticed the Soundkeeper sitting disconsolately on a pile of rubble. "I'm terribly sorry," said Milo sympathetically, as the three of them went to console her. "But we had to do it," added Talk, sniffing around the ruins. "What a terrible mess," observed the Humbug, with his knack for saying exactly the wrong thing. The Soundkeeper looked around with an expression of unrelieved sadness on her unhappy face. "It would take years to collect all those sounds again," she sobbed, "and even longer to put them back in proper order. But it's all my fault, for you can't improve sound by having only silence. The problem is to use each at the proper time." As she spoke, the familiar and unmistakable squinch of the Din's heavy footsteps could be heard plodding over the hill, and when he finally appeared, he was dragging an incredibly large sack behind him. "Can anyone use these sounds?" he puffed, mopping his forehead. "They all came over the hill at once, and none of them are awful enough for me." The Soundkeeper peered into the sack, and there were all the sounds which had burst from the vault. "How nice of you to return them!" she cried happily. "You and the doctor must come by for an evening of beautiful music where my fortress is repaired." The thought of it so horrified the Din that he excused himself immediately and dashed off down the road in a great panic. "I hope I haven't offended him," she said with some concern. He only likes unpleasant sounds, volunteered Talk. Ah, yes, she sighed. I keep forgetting that many people do. But I suppose they aren't necessary, for you'd never really know how pleasant one was unless you knew how unpleasant it wasn't. She paused for a moment, then continued. If only rhyme and reason were here, I'm sure things would improve. That's why we're going to rescue them, said Milo proudly. What a long, hard journey that will be. You'll need some nourishment, she cried, handing Milo a small brown package neatly wrapped and tied with string. Now remember, they're not for eating, but for listening, because you will often be hungry for sounds as well as food. Here are street noises at night, train whistles a long way off, dry leaves burning, busy department stores, crunching toast, creaking bed springs, and of course, all kinds of laughter. There's a little of each, and in far-off, lonely places I think you'll be glad to have them. I'm sure we will, replied Milo gratefully. Just take this road to the sea and turn left, she told him. You'll soon be in Digitopolis. And almost before she had finished, they had said goodbye and left the valley behind them. The shoreline was peaceful and flat, and the calm sea bumped it playfully along the sandy beach. In the distance, a beautiful island covered with palm trees and flowers beckoned invitingly from the sparkling water. Nothing can possibly go wrong now, cried the humbug happily, and as soon as he said it, he leapt from the car, as if struck by a pin, and sailed all the way to the little island. And we'll have plenty of time, answered Talk, who hadn't noticed that the bug was missing, and he too suddenly leaped into the air and disappeared. It certainly couldn't be a nicer day, agreed Milo, who was too busy looking at the road to see the others had gone, and in a split second he was gone also. Hi, Booby! You want attention? Can't give you attention now, buddy. Booby's wanting my attention. He landed next to Talk and the terrified humbug on the tiny island, which now looked completely different. Instead of palms and flowers, there were only rocks and the twisted stumps of long-dead trees. It certainly didn't seem like the same place they had seen from the road. Pardon me, said Milo to the first man who happened by. Can you tell me where I am? Pardon me, replied the man. Can you tell me who I am? The man was dressed in a shaggy tweed jacket and knickers with long woolen socks and a cap that had peaked both front and back, and he seemed as confused as he could be. You must know who you are, said Milo impatiently. You must know where you are, he replied with equal annoyance. Oh dear, this is going to be difficult, Milo whispered to Talk. I wonder if we can help him. They conferred for a few minutes, and finally the bug looked up and said, Can you describe yourself? Yes, indeed, the man replied, happily. I'm as tall as can be, and he grew straight up until all that could be seen of him were his shoes and stockings. And I'm as short as I can be, and he shrank down to the size of a pebble. I'm as generous as I can be, he said, handing each of them a large red apple, and I'm as selfish as I can be. He snarled, grabbing him back again. I'm as strong as I can be, he roared, lifting an enormous boulder over his head. And I'm as weak as I can be, he gasped, staggering under the weight of his hat. I'm as smart as I can be, he remarked in 12 different languages, and I'm as stupid as I can be, he admitted, putting both feet in one shoe. I'm as graceful as can be, he hummed, balancing on one toe, and I'm as clumsy as I can be, he cried, sticking his thumb in his eye. I'm as fast as I can be, he announced, running around the island twice in no time at all. And I'm as slow as can be, he complained, waving goodbye to a snail. Is that any help to you? Once again they conferred in busy whispers until all three agreed. It's really very simple, said the humbug, twirling his cane. If everything you say is true, added Talk, then without a doubt, Milo concluded brightly, you must be Canby. Of course, yes, of course, the man shouted. Why didn't I think of that? I'm as happy as can be. And he quickly sat down, put his head in his hands, and sighed. But I'm also as sad as can be. Now will you tell me where we are? Asked Talk as he looked around the desolate island. To be sure, said Canby. You're on the island of conclusions. Make yourself at home. You have to be here for some time. But how did we get here? Asked Milo, who was still a bit puzzled by being there at all. You jumped, of course, explained Canby. That's the way most everyone gets here. It's really quite simple. Every time you decide something without having a good reason, you jump to conclusions whether you like it or not. It's such an easy trip to make that I've been here hundreds of times. But this is such an unpleasant-looking place, Marlowe remarked. Yes, that is true, admitted Canby. It does look much better from a distance. As he spoke, at least 8 or 9 more people sailed to the island from every direction possible. Well, I'm going to jump right back, announced the humbug, who took 2 or 3 practice bends, leaped as far as he could, and landed on a heap 2 feet away. That won't do at all, scolded Canby, helping him to his feet. You can never jump away from conclusions. Getting back is not so easy. That's why we're terribly crowded here. That was certainly the truth, for all along the bleak shore and clustered onto the rocks, for as far as anyone could see, were enormous crowds of people, all sadly looking out to the sea. Isn't there even a boat? Asked Milo, anxious to get on with his trip. Oh no, replied Canby, shaking his head. The only way back is to swim, and that's a very long and a very hard way. I don't like getting wet, moaned the unhappy humbug, and he shuddered at the thought. Neither do they, said Canby sadly. That's what keeps them there. But I wouldn't worry too much about it, for you can swim all day in a sea of knowledge and still come out completely dry. Most people do. But you must excuse me now. I have to greet the new arrivals. As you know, I'm as friendly as I can be. Over the humbug's strenuous objections, Milo and Tok decided to swim, and, protesting loudly, the bug was dragged along with them towards the sea. Canby hurried off to answer more questions, and the last thing he was heard to say was, "Pardon me, can you tell me who I am?" They swam and swam and swam for what seemed like hours, and only Tok's firm encouragement kept Milo struggling through the icy water. At last they reached the shore, thoroughly exhausted, and, except for the bug, completely soaked. That wasn't bad at all, the humbug said, straightening his tie and brushing himself off. I must visit there again. I'm sure you will, gasped Milo. But from now on, I'm going to have a very good reason before I make up my mind about anything. You can't lose too much time jumping to conclusions. The car was just where they left it, and in a moment they were on their way again, and as the road turned away from the sea and it began its long climb into the mountains, the warm sun and billowy breezes dried them as they went. I hope we reach Digitopolis soon, said Milo, thinking of the breakfast they hadn't eaten. I wonder how far it is. A nice sip of coffee. 14. The dodecahedron leads the way. Up ahead, the road divided into three, and, as if in reply to Milo's question, an enormous road sign pointing in all the 3 directions stated clearly, Digitopolis, 5 miles, 1,600 rods, 8,800 yards, 26,400 feet, 316,800 inches, 633,600 half inches, and then some. Let's travel by miles, advised the humbug. It's shorter. Let's travel by half inches, suggested Milo. It's quicker. But which road should we take? Asked Tok. It must make a difference. As they argued, the most peculiar little figure stepped nimbly from behind the sign and approached them, talking all the while. Yes, indeed. Indeed it does. Certainly. Yes. It does make a difference, undoubtedly. He was constructed, for that's really the only way to describe him, of a large assortment of lines and angles connected together into one solid, many-sided shape, somewhat like a cube that had all its corners cut off, and then had all its corners cut off again. Each of the edges were neatly labeled with a small letter, and each of the angles with a large one. He wore a handsome beret on top, and peering intently from one of his several surfaces with a very serious face. Perhaps if you look at the picture, you'll know what I mean. I forgot. I forgot to mention that this book is illustrated. It has illustrations, but I can't really. I wish I could show you. I can't really show you the pictures right now. I'm so sorry about that. But yes, he's a walking. What's it called? Dodecahedron. He's like a little weird shape with legs and a face. When he reached the car, the figure doffed his cap and recited in a loud, clear voice. My angles are many, my sides are not few. I'm the dodecahedron. Who are you? What's a dodecahedron? Inquired Milo, who was barely able to pronounce the strange word. See for yourself, he said, turning around slowly. A dodecahedron is a mathematical shape with 12 faces. Just as he said it, 11 other faces appeared, one on each surface, and each one wore a different expression. I usually use one at a time, he confided, as all but the smiling one disappeared again. It saves wear and tear. What are you called? Milo, said Milo. That is an odd name, he said, changing his smiling face for a frowning one. And you only have one face? Is that bad? Asked Milo, making sure it was still there. You'll soon wear it out using it for everything, replied the dodecahedron. Now I have one for smiling, one for laughing, one for crying, one for frowning, one for thinking, one for pouting, and 6 more besides. Is everyone with one face called a Milo? Oh no, Milo replied. Some are called Henry or George or Robert or John or lots of other things. How terribly confusing, he cried. Everything here is called exactly what it is. The triangles are called triangles, the circles are called circles, and even the same number have the same name. Why, can you imagine what would happen if we named all the twos Henry or George or Robert or John or lots of other things? You have to say Robert plus John equals 4, and if that 4's name was Albert, things would go hopeless. I never thought of it that way, Milo admitted. Then I suggest you begin at once, admonished the dodecahedron from his admonishing face. For here in Digitopolis, everything is quite precise. Then perhaps you can help us decide which road to take, said Milo. By all means, he replied happily. There's nothing to it. If a small car carrying 3 people at 30 miles an hour for 10 minutes along a road 5 miles long at 11:35 in the morning starts at the same time as 3 people who have been traveling in a little automobile at 20 miles an hour for 15 minutes on another road exactly twice as long as 1/2 the distance of the other, will a dog, a bug, and a boy travel an equal distance in the same time or in the same distance in an equal time along a third road in mid-October, then which one arrives first and which is the best way to go? 17! Shouted the humbug, scribbling furiously on a piece of paper. Well, I'm not sure, but Milo stammered after several minutes of frantic figuring. You'll have to do better than that, scolded the dodecahedron, or you'll never know how far you've gone or whether or not you've ever gotten there. I'm not very good at problems, admitted Milo. What a shame, sighed the dodecahedron. They're so very useful. Why, did you know that if a beaver 2 feet long with a tail 1.5 feet long can build a dam 12 feet high and 6 feet wide in 2 days, and all you need to build Boulder Dam is a beaver 68 feet long with a 51-foot tail? Where would you find a beaver that big? Grumbled the humbug as his pencil point snapped. I'm sure I don't know, he replied. But if you did, you would certainly know what to do with him. That's absurd, objected Milo, whose head was spinning from all the numbers and questions. That may be true, he acknowledged, but it's completely accurate. And as long as the question is right, as long as the answer is right, who cares if the question is wrong? If you want sense, you have to make it yourself. All 3 arrive at the same place at the same time, interrupted Talk, who had been patiently doing the first problem. Correct, shouted the dodecahedron, and I'll take you there myself. Now you can see how important problems are. If you hadn't done this one properly, you might have gone the wrong way. I can't see where I made my mistake, said the humbug, frantically rechecking his figures. But if all the roads arrive at the same place at the same time, then aren't they all the right way? Asked Milo. Certainly not, he shouted, glaring from his most upset face. They're all the wrong way. Just because you have a choice doesn't mean that any of them has to be right. He walked to the sign and quickly spun it around 3 times. As he did, the 3 roads vanished and a new one suddenly appeared, heading in the direction that the sign now pointed. Is every road 5 miles from Digitopolis? Asked Milo. I'm afraid it has to be, the dodecahedron replied, leaping onto the back of the car. It's the only sign we've got. The new road was quite bumpy and full of stones, and each time they hit one, the dodecahedron bounced into the air and landed on one of his faces, with a sulk or a smile or a laugh or a frown, depending upon which one it was. We'll soon be there, he announced happily, after one of his short flights. Welcome to the land of numbers. It doesn't look very inviting, the bug remarked, for, as they climbed higher and higher, not a tree or a blade of grass could be seen anywhere. Only the rocks remained. Is this the place where numbers are made? Asked Milo as the car lurched again, and this time the dodecahedron sailed off down the mountainside, head over heels in a grunt over grimace, until he sat side up and looked like the entrance to a cave. They are not made, he replied, as if nothing happened. You have to dig for them. Don't you know anything at all about numbers? Well, I don't think that they're very important, snapped Milo, too embarrassed to admit the truth. Not important! Roared the dodecahedron, turning red with fury. Could you have tea for 2 without the 2? Or 3 blind mice without the 3? Would there be 4 corners of the earth if there weren't a 4? And how would you sail the 7 seas without a 7? All I meant was, began Milo, but the dodecahedron, overcome with emotion and shouting furiously, carried right on. If you had high hopes, how would you know how high they were? And did you know that a narrow escape comes in all different widths? Would you travel the whole wide world without ever knowing how wide it was? And how could you do anything that at long last, he concluded, waving his arms over his head, without knowing how long the last was? Why, numbers are the most beautiful and valuable things in the world. Just follow me and I'll show you. He turned on his heel and stalked off into the cave. Come along, he shouted from the dark hole. I can't wait for you all day. And in a moment they'd follow him into the mountain. It took several minutes for their eyes to become accustomed to the dim light, and during that time strange scratching, scraping, tapping, and scuffling noises could be heard all around them. Put these on, instructed the dodecahedron, handing each of them a helmet with a flashlight attached to the top. Where are we going? Whispered Milo, for it seemed like the kind of place in which he whispered. We're here, he replied, with a sweeping gesture. This is the numbers mine. Milo squinted in the darkness, and saw for the first time that they had entered a vast cavern lit only by a soft, eerie glow from the great stalactites which hung ominously from the ceiling. Passages and corridors were honeycombed the walls, and wound their way from floor to ceiling, up and down the sides of the cave. And, everywhere he looked, Milo saw little men no bigger than himself, digging and chopping, shoveling and scraping, pulling and tugging carts full of stones from one place to another. Right this way, instructed the dodecahedron, and watch where you step. As he spoke, his voice echoed and re-echoed again, mixing its sound with a buzz of activity all around them. Talk trotted along next to Milo, and the humbug, stepping daintily, followed behind. Whose mine is it? Asked Milo, stepping around 2 of the loaded wagons. By the 4,827,659 hairs on my head. It's mine, of course, bellowed a voice from across the cavern, and striding towards them came a figure who could only have been the mathematician. He was dressed in a long, flowing robe, covered entirely with complex mathematical equations, and a tall, pointed cap that made him look very wise. In his left hand he carried a long staff with a pencil point at one end and a large rubber eraser at the other. It's a lovely mine, apologized the humbug, who was always intimidated by loud noises. The biggest number mine in the kingdom, said the mathematician proudly. Are there any precious stones in it? Asked Milo excitedly. Precious stones, he roared, even louder than before. And then he leaned over towards Milo and whispered softly, by the 8,247,312 threads in my robe. I'll say they are. Look here. He reached into one of the carts and pulled out a small object, which he polished vigorously on his robe. When he held it up to the light, it sparkled brightly. "But that's a 5, objected Milo, for that's exactly what it was. "Exactly," agreed the mathematician. "As valuable a jewel as you'll find anywhere. Look at some of the others." He scooped up a great handful of stones and poured them into Milo's arms. They included all the numbers from 1 to 9, and even an assortment of zeros. "We dig them and polish them right here," volunteered the dodecahedron, pointing to a group of workers busily employed at the buffing wheels. "And then we send them all over the world. Marvelous, aren't they?" "They are exceptional," said Talk, who had a special fondness for numbers. "So that's where they come from," said Milo, looking in awe at the glittering collection of numbers. He returned them to the dodecahedron as carefully as possible, but as he did, one dropped to the floor with a smash and broke in two. The humbug winced, and Milo looked terribly concerned. "Oh, don't worry about that," said the mathematician as he scooped up the pieces. "We used the broken ones for fractions." "Haven't you any diamonds or emeralds or rubies?" Haven't you any diamonds, emeralds, or rubies?" asked the bug irritably, for he was quite disappointed in what he'd seen so far. "Yes, indeed," the mathematician replied, leading them to the rear of the cave. "Right this way." There, piled into enormous mounds that reached almost the ceiling, were not only diamonds, emeralds, and rubies, but also sapphires, amethysts, topazes, moonstones, and garnets. It was the most amazing mass of wealth that any of them had ever seen. "They're such a terrible nuisance," sighed the mathematician, "and no one can think of what to do with them, so we just keep digging them up and throwing them out. Now," he said, taking a silver whistle from his pocket and blowing it loudly, "let's have some lunch." And for the first time in his life, the astonished bug couldn't think of a thing to say. "Hi, Nicholas! Thank you for being here! Hi! I hope you're enjoying the story!" Just have a sip of coffee, keep my throat nice and soothed. 15. This way to infinity. Into the cavern rushed 8 of the strongest miners carrying an immense cauldron which bubbled and sizzled and sent great clouds of savory steam spiraling slowly to the ceiling. A sweet yet pungent aroma hung in the air and drifted easily from one anxious nose to another, stopping only long enough to make several mouths water and a few stomachs growl. Milo, Talk, and the humbug watched eagerly as the rest of the workers put down their tools and gathered around the big pot to help themselves. "Perhaps you'd care for something to eat," said the mathematician, offering each of them a heaping bowlful. "Yes, sir," said Milo, who was beside himself with hunger. "Thank you," added Talk. The humbug made no reply, for he was already too busy eating, and in a moment the 3 of them had finished absolutely everything they'd been given. "Please have another portion," said the mathematician, filling their bowls once more, and as quickly as they'd finished the first one, the second one was empty too. "Don't stop now," he insisted, serving them again, and again, and again, and again, and again. "How very strange," thought Milo as he finished eating his 7th helping. "Each one I eat makes me a little hungrier than the one before." "Do have some more," suggested the mathematician, as they continued to eat just as fast as he filled the plates. After Milo had eaten 9 portions, Talk 11, and the humbug without once stopping to look up, 23, the mathematician blew his whistle for a second time, and immediately the pot was removed and the miners returned to work. Gasped the bug, suddenly realizing that he was 23 times hungrier than when he started. "I think I'm starving." "Me too," complained Milo, whose stomach felt as empty as he could ever remember. "And I ate so much." "Yes, it was delicious, wasn't it?" agreed the pleased dodecahedron, wiping the gravy from several of his mouths. "It's the specialty of the kingdom. Subtraction stew." "I have more of an appetite than when I began," said Talk, leaning weakly against one of the larger rocks. "Certainly," replied the mathematician. "What did you expect? The more you eat, the hungrier you get. Everyone knows that." "They do," said Milo doubtfully. "Then how do you ever get enough?" "Enough," he said impatiently. "Here in Digitopolis we have our meals when we are full and eat until we're hungry. That way, when you don't have anything at all, you have more than enough. It's a very economical system. You must have been quite stuffed to have eaten so much." It's completely logical, explained the dodecahedron. The more you want, the less you get, and the less you get, the more you have. Simple arithmetic, that's all. Suppose you had something and added something to it. What would that make? More, said Milo quickly. Quite correct, he nodded. Now suppose you had something and added nothing to it. What would you have? The same, he answered again, without much conviction. Splendid, cried the dodecahedron. And suppose you had something and added less than nothing to it. What would you have then? Famine! Roared the English humbug, who suddenly realized that was exactly what he had eaten 23 bowls of. It's not as bad as all that, said the dodecahedron from his most sympathetic face. In a few hours you'll be nice and full again, just in time for dinner. Oh dear, said Milo sadly and softly. I only eat when I'm hungry. What a curious idea, said the mathematician, raising his staff over his head and scrubbing the rubber end back and forth several times on the ceiling. The next thing you'll have us believe is that you only sleep when you are tired. And by the time he'd finished that sentence, the cavern, the miners, and the dodecahedron had vanished, leaving just the four of them standing in the mathematician's workshop. I often find, he casually explained to his dazed visitors, that the best way to get from one place to another is to erase everything and begin again. Please make yourself at home. Do you always travel that way? Asked Milo, as he glanced curiously at the strange circular room, whose 16 tiny arched windows corresponded exactly to the 16 points of the compass. Around the entire circumference were numbers from 0 to 360, marking the degrees of the circle, and on the floors, walls, tables, chairs, and desks, and cabinets, and ceilings were labels showing their height, width, depth, and distance to and from each other. One side was a gigantic notepad set on an artist's easel, and from hooks and strings and hung a collection of scales, rulers, measures, weights, tapes, and all sorts of other devices for measuring any number of things in every possible way. No, indeed, replied the mathematician, and this time he raised the sharpened end of his staff and drew a thin straight line in the air, and then walked gracefully across it from one side of the room to the other. Most of the time I take the shortest distance between any 2 points, and, of course, when I should be in several places at once, he remarked, writing 7 times 1 equals 7 carefully on the notepad. I simply multiply. Suddenly there were 7 mathematicians standing side by side, and each one looked exactly like the other. How did you do that? Gasped Milo. There's nothing to it, they all said in chorus, if you have a magic staff. Then 6 of them canceled themselves out and simply disappeared. But it's only a big pencil, the humbug objected, tapping at it with his cane. True enough, agreed the mathematician, but once you learn to use it, there's no end what you can do. Can you make things disappear? Asked Milo excitedly. Why, certainly, he said, striding over to the easel. Just step a little closer and watch carefully. After demonstrating that there was nothing up his sleeves, in his hat, or behind his back, he wrote quickly, 4 plus 9 minus 2 times 16 plus 1 divided by 3 times 6 minus 67 plus 8 times 2 minus 3 plus 26 minus 1 divided by 34 dividing by 34 plus 3 divided by 7 plus 2 minus 5 equals... Then he looked up expectantly. 17! Shouted the bug, who was always managed to be the first with the wrong answer. It all comes down to 0, corrected Milo. Precisely, said the mathematician, who was making a very theatrical bow, and then the entire line of numbers vanished before their eyes. Now, is there anything else you'd like to see? Yes, please, said Milo. Can you show me the biggest number there is? I'd be delighted, he replied, opening one of his closet doors. We keep it right here. It took 4 miners to dig it out. Inside was the biggest 3 Milo had ever seen. It was fully twice as high as the mathematician. No, that's not what I meant, objected Milo. Can you show me the longest number there is? Surely, said the mathematician, opening another door. Here it is. It took 3 carts to carry it here. Inside this closet was the longest 8 imaginable. It was just about as wide as the 3 was high. No, that's not what I meant either, said Milo, looking helplessly at Talk. I think what you would like to see, said the dog, scratching himself just under 4:30, is the number of the greatest possible magnitude. Why didn't you say so? Said the mathematician, who was busily measuring the edge of a raindrop. What is the greatest number you can think of? 9,999,999,999,999, recited Milo, breathlessly. Very good, said the mathematician. Now add one to it. Now add one again, he repeated, and when Milo added the previous one. Now add one again. 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 Now add... But when can I stop? Pleaded Milo. Never, said the mathematician, with a little smile. For the number you want is always at least one more than the number you've got. And it's so large that if you start saying it yesterday, you wouldn't finish tomorrow. Where could you ever find a number so big? Scoffed the humbug. In the same place they have the smallest number there is, he answered hopefully. And you know what that is. Certainly, said the bug, suddenly remembering something to do in the other end of the room. 1/1,000,000th? Asked Milo, trying to think of the smallest fraction possible. Almost, said the mathematician. Now divide it in half. Now divide it in half again. 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 Now divide... Oh, dear, shouted Milo, holding his hands to his ears. That doesn't ever stop either? How can it? Said the mathematician. When you can always take half of whatever you have left until it's so small that if you started to say it right now, you'd finish even before you began. Where could you keep anything so tiny? Milo asked, trying very hard to imagine such a thing. The mathematician stopped what he was doing and explained simply. Why, in a box that's so small you can't see it, and that's kept in a drawer that's so small that you can't see it, and a dresser so small you can't see it, and a house that's so small you can't see it, on a street that's so small you can't see it, and a city that's so small you can't see it, which is part of a country that's so small you can't see it, in a world that's so small you can't see it. Then he sat down, fanned himself with a handkerchief, and continued. Then, of course, we keep the whole thing in another box that's so small you can't see it, and, if you follow me, I'll show you where to find it. They walked to one of the small windows, and there, tied to the sill, was one end of a line that stretched along the ground and into the distance until completely out of sight. Just follow that line forever, said the mathematician, and when you reach the end, turn left, and then you'll find the land of infinity. Hello? Hello, Bean. Oh, okay. Come here. Come here. You want my attention? I'm right here. Come, pretty girl. Okay. She's in the plants. She's in the plants. Silly girl. Silly little beans. And she's gonna sit by the window by the plants. Okay. And when you reach the end, turn left. Then you'll find the land of infinity, where the tallest, the shortest, and the biggest, and the smallest, and the most, and the least of everything is kept. I really don't have that much time, said Milo anxiously. Isn't there a quicker way? Well, you might try this flight of stairs, he suggested, opening another door and pointing up. It goes there, too. Milo bounded across the room and started up the stairs 2 at a time. Wait for me, please, he shouted to Talkin the humbug. I'll be gone just a few minutes. 16. A very dirty bird. Up he went, very quickly at first, then more slowly, then in a little while even more slowly than that, and finally, after many minutes of climbing up the endless stairway, one weary foot was barely able to follow the other. Milo suddenly realized that with all his efforts he was no closer to the top than when he began, and not a great deal further from the bottom. But he struggled on for a while longer, until at last, completely exhausted, he collapsed onto one of the steps. I should have known it, he mumbled, resting his tired legs and filling his lungs with air. This is just like the line that goes on forever, and I'll never get there. You wouldn't like it much anyway, replied someone gently. Infinity is a dreadfully poor place. They can never manage to make ends meet. Milo looked up with his head still resting heavily in his hands, and he was becoming quite accustomed to being addressed at the oddest times, in the oddest places, by the oddest people, and this time he was not at all disappointed. Standing next to him on the step was exactly one half of a small child, had been divided neatly from the top to bottom. "Pardon me for staring," said Milo, after he had been staring for some time, "but I've never seen half a child before." It's 0.58 to be precise," replied the child from the left side of his mouth, which happened to be the only side of his mouth. "I beg your pardon," said Milo. "It's 0.58, he repeated. "It's a little bit more than half." "Have you always been that way?" asked Milo impatiently, for he felt that that was a needlessly fine distinction. "My goodness, no," the child assured him. "A few years ago I was just 0.42, and believe me, that was terribly inconvenient." "What is the rest of your family like?" said Milo, this time with a bit more sympathetically. "Oh, we're just the average family," he said thoughtfully. "Mother, father, and 2.58 children. And, as I explained, I'm the 0.58. "It must be rather odd being only part of a person," Milo remarked. "Not at all," said the child. "Every average family has 2.58 children, so I have always have someone to play with. Besides, each family also has an average of 1.3 automobiles, and since I'm the only one who can drive 3/10 of a car, I get used to it all the time." "But averages aren't real," objected Milo. "They're just imaginary." "That may be so, but they're also very useful at times. For instance, if you didn't have any money at all, but you happened to be with 4 other people who had $10 apiece, then you'd each have an average of $8. Isn't that right?" "I guess so," said Milo weakly. "Hi, Jack! Hi! Welcome to the story time. I hope you're enjoying it. Friend. Thank you for being here." "I guess so," said Milo weakly. "Well, think about how much better off you'd be, just because of averages," he explained convincingly. "And think of the poor farmer when it doesn't rain all year. If there wasn't an average yearly of rainfall of 35 inches in this part of the country, all his crops would wither and die." It all sounded terribly confusing to Milo, for he had always had trouble in school with this subject. So have I. There are still other advantages," continued the child. "For instance, if one rat were cornered by 9 cats, then on average each cat would be 10% rat, and the rat would be 90% cat. If you happen to be a rat, you can see how much nicer that would make things." "But that can never be," said Milo, jumping to his feet. "Don't be too sure," said the child patiently. "For one of the nicest things about mathematics—" "Oh my gosh, excuse me! Ah! Ow! That one hurt! Ah! Excuse me! Wow! I almost didn't feel that one coming! Ah! Ah! Excuse me! "Okay. There are still other advantages," continued the child. No wait, sorry. But that can never be," said Milo, jumping to his feet. "Don't be too sure," said the child patiently. "For one of the nicest things about mathematics, or anything else you might care to learn, is that many of the things which can never be often are. You see," he went on, "it's very much like you're trying to reach infinity. You know that it's there, but you just don't know where. But you just don't know where. But just because you can never reach it doesn't mean that it's not worth looking for." "Thank you, Jack. Thank you for the bless yous. Thank you." Oh, that one surprised me. I guess I'm a little sniffly today. "Yeah, my slimy friends are here. It's still kind of hot, and they destabilize when they're hot. They get all gooey and melty. So we have them right here in my nice cool lemmy, and we keep them nice and cool, and they stabilize a bit better. They're still young, so we gotta keep taking care of them. Yep. Just because you can never reach it doesn't mean that it's not worth looking for." "I hadn't thought of it that way," said Milo, staring down the stairs. "I think I'll go back now." A wise decision, the child agreed. But try again someday. Perhaps you'll get much closer. And, as Milo waved goodbye, he smiled warmly, which he usually did on an average of 47 times a day. Everyone here knows so much more than I do, thought Milo as he leaped from step to step. I'll have to do a lot better if I'm going to rescue the princesses. I'm doing well, Jack. Thank you for asking. The heat wave is over, but it's still quite hot. But I'm keeping cool. It's a lot more comfortable now that the heat wave is over, so... But yeah, just keeping cool, keeping comfortable. Thank you for asking. Everyone here knows so much more than I do, thought Milo as he leapt from step to step. I have to do a lot better if I'm going to rescue the princesses. In a few moments he reached the bottom again and burst into the workshop, where Talk and the Humbug were eagerly watching the math magician perform. Ah, back already, he cried, greeting him with a friendly wave. I hope you found what you were looking for. I'm afraid not, admitted Milo. And then he added in a very discouraged tone, Everything in Digitopolis is much too difficult for me. The math magician nodded knowingly and stroked his chin several times. You'll find, he remarked gently, that the only thing you can do easily is be wrong, and that's hardly worth the effort. Milo tried very hard to understand all the things he's been told, and all the things he'd seen, and, as he spoke, one curious thing still bothered him. Why is it, he said quietly, that quite often even the things which are correct just don't seem to be right? A look of deep melancholy crossed the mathematician's face, and his eyes grew moist with sadness. Everything was silent, and it was several minutes before he was able to reply at all. How very true, he sobbed, supporting himself on the staff. It had been that way since rhyme and reason were banished. Quite so, began the humbug. I personally feel that, and all because of that stubborn, wretched Azaz! Roared the mathematician, completely overwhelming the bug, for now his sadness had changed to fury, and he stalked about the room, adding up anger and multiplying wrath. It's all his fault! Perhaps if you discussed it with him, Marlowe started to say, but never had the time to finish. He's much too unreasonable, interrupted the mathematician again. Why, just last month I sent him a very friendly letter, which he never had the courtesy to answer. See for yourself. He handed Milo a copy of the letter which read 4,738, 1919, 667, 394,017, 5,841, 62,598, 85,371, 14, 39,588, 190,434, 203, 26,689, 57,331. Hello, Bean. Hi. She's so vocal today. 481. The numbers are small. It's like a picture. The numbers are quite small. 481,206, 5,864, 98,043. I'm not reading that last one. That's too many numbers. I'm sorry. It's a bunch of numbers. But maybe he doesn't understand numbers, said Milo, who found it a little difficult to read himself. Boy, so did I. Nonsense, bellowed the mathematician. Everyone understands numbers. No matter what language you speak, they always mean the same thing. A 7 is a 7 anywhere in the world. My goodness, thought Milo. Everyone is so terribly sensitive about the things they know best. With your permission, said Talk, changing the subject, we'd like to rescue Rhyme and Reason. Has Azaz agreed to it? The mathematician inquired. Yes, sir, the dog assured him. Then I don't, he thundered again. For since they've been banished, we never agreed on anything, and we never will. He emphasized his last remark with a dark and ominous look. Never? Asked Milo, with the slightest touch of disbelief in his voice. Never, he repeated, and if you can prove otherwise, you have my permission to go. Well, said Milo, who had thought about this problem very carefully ever since leaving Dictionopolis. Now with whatever Azaz agrees, you disagree. Correct, said the mathematician with a tolerant smile. And with whatever Azaz disagrees, you agree. Also correct, yawned the mathematician, nonchalantly cleaning his fingernails with the point of his staff. Then each of you agrees that he will disagree with whatever each of you agrees with, said Milo triumphantly. And if you both disagree with the same thing, then aren't you really in agreement? I've been tricked! Cried the mathematician helplessly, for no matter how he figured, it still came out just that way. Splendid effort, commented the humbug jovially. Exactly the way I would have done it. And now we may go? Added Talk. The mathematician accepted his defeat with grace, nodded weakly, and then drew the three travelers to his side. It's a long and dangerous journey, he began softly, and a furrow of concern creased his forehead. Long before you find them, the demons will know you're there. Watch for them well, he emphasized, for when they appear, it might be too late. The humbug shuddered down to his shoes, and Milo felt the tips of his fingers suddenly grow cold. But there is one problem even more serious than that, he whispered ominously. What is it? Gasped Milo, who was not really sure he wanted to know. I'm afraid I can tell you only when you return. Come along, said the mathematician, and I'll show you the way. And simply by carrying the three, he transported them all to the very edge of Digitopolis. Behind them lay all the kingdoms of wisdom, and up ahead a narrow, rutted path led towards the mountains in darkness. We'll never get the car up there, said Milo unhappily. True enough, replied the mathematician, but you can be in ignorance quick enough without riding all the way. If you're to be successful, it will have to be step by step. But I would like to take my gifts, Milo insisted. So you shall, announced the dodecahedron, who appeared from nowhere with his arms full. Here are your sights, and here are your sounds, and here, he said, handing Milo the last of them disdainfully, are your words. And most important of all, added the mathematician, here is your own magic staff. Use it well, and there is nothing it cannot do for you. He placed in Milo's breast pocket a small gleaming pencil which, except for the size, was much like his own. Then, with a last word of encouragement, he and the dodecahedron, who was simultaneously sobbing, frowning, pining, and sighing from 4 of his saddest faces, made their farewells, and watched as the 3 tiny figures disappeared into the forbidding mountains of ignorance. Almost immediately, the light began to fade as the difficult path wandered aimlessly upwards, inching forward and almost as reluctantly as the trembling humbug. Talk, as usual, led the way, sniffing ahead for danger, and Milo, his bag of precious possessions slung over one shoulder, followed silently and resolutely behind. Perhaps someone should stay back to guard the way, said the unhappy bug, offering his services, but since his suggestion was met with silence, he followed glumly along. The higher they went, the darker it became, though it wasn't the darkness of night, but rather more like a mixture of lurking shadows. Oh. That's weird, okay. The higher they went, the darker it became, and though it wasn't the darkness of night, but rather more like a mixture of lurking shadows and evil intentions which oozed from the slimy, moss-covered cliffs and blotted out the light. A cruel wind shrieked through the rocks, and the air was thick and heavy, as if it had been used several times before. On they went, higher and higher up the dizzying trail. On one side the sheer stone walls and brutal peaks towering above them, and on the other an endless, limitless, bottomless nothing. I can hardly see a thing, said Milo, taking hold of Talk's tail as the sticky mist engulfed the moon. Perhaps we shall wait till morning. There'll be morning for you soon enough, came a reply directly above, and this was followed by a hideous cackling laugh, very much like someone choking on a fishbone. clinging to one of the greasy rocks and blending almost perfectly with it was a large, unkempt, and exceedingly soiled bird who looked more like a dirty floor mop than anything else. He had a sharp, dangerous beak, and the one eye he chose to open stared down maliciously. "I don't think you understand," said Milo timidly as the watchdog growled in warning. "We're looking for a place to spend the night." "It's not yours to spend," the bird shrieked again, and followed it with the same horrible laugh. "That doesn't make any sense. You see," he started to explain. "Dollars or cents is still not yours to spend," the bird replied haughtily. "But I didn't mean," insisted Milo. "Of course you're mean," interrupted the bird, closing the eye that had been open and opening the one that had been closed. "Anyone who'd spend the night that doesn't belong to him is very mean." "Well, I thought that by—" he tried again differently. "That's a different story," interjected the bird a bit more amiably. "If you want to buy, I'm sure that I can arrange to sell. But with what you're doing, you'll probably end up in a cell anyway." "That doesn't seem right," said Milo helplessly, for with the bird talking everything the wrong way, he hardly knew what he was saying. "Agreed," said the bird with a sharp click of his beak, "but neither is it left, although if I were you I would have left a long time ago." "Let me try once more," said Milo said in an effort to explain. "In other words—" "You mean you have other words?" cried the bird happily. "Well, by all means use them. You're certainly not doing very well with the ones you have now." "Must you interrupt like that?" said Talk irritably, for even he was becoming impatient. "Naturally," said the bird cackled. "It's my job. I take the words right out of your mouth. Haven't we met before? I'm the ever-present word snatcher, and I'm sure I know your friend the bug." And then he leaned all the way forward and gave a terrible knowing smile. The humbug, who was too big to hide and too frightened to move, denied everything. "Is everyone who lives in ignorance like you?" asked Milo. "Much worse," he said longingly. "But I don't live here. I'm from a place very far away called Context." "Don't you think you should be getting back?" suggested the bug, holding one arm up in front of him. "What a horrible thought," the bird shuddered. "It's such an unpleasant place that I spend almost all my time out of it. Besides, what could be nicer than those grimy mountains?" "Almost anything," thought Milo as he pulled up his collar, and then asked the bird, "Are you a demon?" "I'm afraid not," he replied sadly, as several filthy tears rolled down his beak. "I've tried, but the best I can manage to be is a nuisance." And before Milo could reply, he flapped his dingy wings and flew off in a cascade of dust and dirt and fuzz. "Wait!" shouted Milo, who thought of many more questions he wanted to ask. 34 pounds! Shrieked the bird as he disappeared into the fog. "He was certainly no help," said Milo, after they had been walking again for some time. "That's why I drove him off," cried the humbug, fiercely brandishing his cane. "Now let's find the demons." "That might be sooner than you think," remarked Talk, looking back at the sudden trembling bug. And then the trail turned again and continued to climb. In a few minutes they reached the crest, only to find that beyond it lay another one even higher, and beyond that several more, whose tops were lost in swirling darkness. For a short stretch the path became broad and flat, and just ahead, leaning comfortably against a dead tree, stood a very elegant-looking gentleman. He was beautifully dressed in a dark suit with a well-pressed shirt and tie. His shoes were polished, and his nails were clean, and his hat was well brushed, and a white handkerchief adorned his breast pocket. But his expression was somewhat blank. In fact, it was completely blank, for he had neither an eyes, nose, or mouth. "Hello, little boy," he said, amiably shaking Milo by the hand. "And how's the faithful dog?" he inquired, giving Talk 3 or 4 strong and friendly pats. "And who is this handsome creature?" he asked, tipping his hat to the very pleased humbug. "I'm so happy to see you all." What a pleasant surprise to meet someone so nice, they all thought, especially here. "I wonder if you could spare me a little of your time," he inquired politely, "and help with a few small jobs." "Why, of course," said the humbug cheerfully. "Gladly," added Talk. "Yes, indeed," said Milo, who wondered for just a moment how it was possible for someone so agreeable to have a face with no features at all. "Splendid," he said happily, "for there are just 3 tasks. Firstly, I would like to move this pile from here to there." he explained, pointing to an enormous mound of fine sand. "But I'm afraid that all I have are these tiny tweezers." And he gave them to Milo, who immediately began transporting one grain at a time. "Secondly, I would like to empty this well and fill the other, but I have no bucket, so you have to use this eyedropper." And he handed it to Talk, who undertook it at once to carry one drop at a time from well to well. "And lastly, I must have a hole through this cliff, and here's a needle to dig it." The eager humbug quickly set to work picking at the solid granite wall. And when they had all been safely started, the very pleasant man returned to the tree and leaned against it once more, continued to stare vacantly down the trail, while Milo, Talk, and the humbug worked hour after 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 17. The Unwelcoming Committee. Excuse me. The humbug whistled gaily at his work, for he was never as happy as when he had a job which required no thinking at all. After what seemed like days, he had dug a hole scarcely large enough for his thumb. Talk shuffled steadily back and forth with the dropper in his teeth, but the full well was still almost full as when he began, and Milo's new pile of sand was hardly a pile at all. "How very strange," said Milo without stopping for a moment. "I've been working steadily all this time, and I don't feel the slightest bit tired or hungry. I could go right on the same way forever." "Perhaps you will," the man agreed with a yawn, at least what sounded like a yawn. "Well, I wish I knew how long it was going to take," Milo whispered, as the dog went by again. "Why not use your magic staff to figure it out?" replied Talk, as clear as anyone with an eyedropper in his mouth could. Milo took the shiny pencil from his pocket and quickly calculated that, at the rate they were going, it would take each of them 837 years to finish. "Pardon me," he said, tugging at this man's sleeve and holding the sheet of figures up for him to see, "but it's going to take 837 years to do these jobs." "Is that so?" replied the man without even turning around. "Well, you'd better get on with it then." "But it hardly seems worthwhile," said Milo softly. "Worthwhile!" the man roared indignantly. "All I meant was that perhaps it isn't too important," Milo repeated, trying not to be impolite. "Of course it's not important," he snarled angrily. "I wouldn't have asked you to do it if I thought it was important." And now, as he turned to face them, he didn't seem quite so pleasant. "Then why bother?" asked Talk, whose alarm suddenly began to ring. "Because, my young friends," he muttered sourly, "what could be more important than doing unimportant things? If you stop to do enough of them, you'll never get anywhere. You never get to where you're going." He punctuated his last remark with a villainous laugh. "Then you must," gasped Milo. "Quite correct," he shrieked triumphantly. "I am the terrible Trivium, demon of petty tasks and worthless job, ogre of wasted effort and monsters of habit." The humbug dropped his needle and stared in disbelief while Milo and Talk began to back away slowly. "Don't try to leave," he ordered, with a menacing sweep of his arm. "For there is so very much to do, and you still have over 800 years to go on the first job." "But why only do unimportant things?" asked Milo, who suddenly remembered how much time he spent each day doing them. "Think of all the trouble it saves," the man explained. His face looks as if he'd be grinning an evil grin, if he could grin at all. "If you only do the easy and useless jobs, you'll never have to worry about the important ones, which are so difficult. You just won't have the time. For there's always something to do and to keep you from doing what you really should be doing. And if you weren't for that dreadful magic staff, you'd never know how much time you were wasting." As he spoke, he tiptoed slowly towards them with his arms outstretched and continued to whisper in a soft, deceitful voice. "Now do come and stay with me. We'll have so much fun together. There are things to fill and things to empty, things to take away and things to bring back, things to pick up and things to put down. And besides all that, we have pencils to sharpen, holes to dig, nails to straighten, stamps to lick, and ever so much more. Why, if you stay here, you'll never have to think again. And with a little practice, you can become a monster of habit too." They were all transfixed by the trivium's smooth, soothing voice. But just as he was about to clutch them in his well-manicured fingers, a voice cried out, "Run! Run!" Milo, who thought it was Talk, turned suddenly and dashed up the trail. "Run! Run!" it shouted again, and this time Talk thought it was Milo, and quickly followed him. "Run! Run!" it urged once more. Now the humbug, not caring who said it, ran desperately after his two friends, with the terrible trivium close behind. "This way! This way!" the voice called again. They turned in its direction and scrambled up difficult, slippery rocks, sliding back at each step almost as far as they had gone forward. With a great effort and many helping paws from Talk, they reached the top of the ridge at last, only 2 steps ahead of the furious trivium. Over here! Advised the voice, and without a moment's hesitation they started through a puddle of sticky ooze, which quickly became ankle-deep, then knee-deep, then hip-deep. Then finally, they were all struggling to go through what felt very much like a waist-deep pool of peanut butter. The trivium, who had discovered a mound of pebbles which needed counting, followed no more, but stood at the edge, shaking his fists, shouting horrible threats and promising to rouse every demon in the mountains. "What a nasty fellow! What a nasty fellow!" gasped Milo, who was having great difficulty just getting his legs to move. "I hope I never meet him again." I believe he stopped chasing us," said the bug, looking back over his shoulder. It's not what behind that worries me," remarked Talk as they stepped from the sticky mess, "but what's ahead." Keep going straight, counseled the voice as they continued to pick their way carefully along the path. Now step up, it recommended, and almost before they knew what was happened, they had all taken a step up and then plunged into the bottom of a deep, murky pit. "But he said up," Milo complained bitterly from where he lay sprawling. "Well, I hope you didn't expect to get anywhere by listening to me," said the voice gleefully. "We'll never get out of here," the humbug moaned, looking at the steep, smooth sides of the pit. That is quite an accurate evaluation of the situation," said the voice coldly. "Then why did you help us at all?" shouted Milo angrily. "Oh, I'd do as much for anybody," he replied. "Bad advice is my specialty. For as you can plainly see, I am the long-nosed, green-eyed, curly-haired, wide-mouthed, thick-necked, broad-shouldered, round-bodied, short-armed, bow-legged, big-footed monster. And if I do say so myself, one of the most frightening fiends in this whole wild wilderness. With me here, you wouldn't dare to escape." And with that he shuffled to the edge of the pit and leered down at his helpless prisoners. Talk and the humbug turned away in fright, but Milo, who had learned by now that people are not always as they say they are, reached for his telescope and took a long look for himself. And there at the rim of the hole, instead of what he expected, stood a small furry creature with very worried eyes and a rather sheepish grin. "Why, you're no long-nosed, green-eyed, curly-haired, wide-mouthed, thick-necked, broad-shouldered, round-bodied, short-armed, bow-legged, or big-footed. And you're not at all frightening," said Milo indignantly. "What kind of demon are you?" The little creature, who seemed stunned at being found out, leapt back out of sight and began to whimper softly. "I'm the demon of insincerity," he sobbed. "I don't mean what I say. I don't mean what I do. I don't mean what I am. Most people who believe what I tell them go the wrong way and stay there, but you and your awful telescope have spoiled everything. I'm going home!" And, crying hysterically, he stamped off in a huff. "It certainly pays to have a good look at things," observed Milo as he wrapped up the telescope with great care. "Now all we have to do is climb out," said Talk, placing his front paws as high on the wall as he could. "Here, hop up on my back." Milo climbed up onto the dog's shoulders. Then the bug crawled onto both of them, and, by standing on Milo's head, just managed to hook his cane onto the root of an old gnarled tree. With a loud complaint he hung on doggedly until the other two had climbed out over him and pulled him up, somewhat dazed and discouraged. "I'll lead the way for a while," he said, brushing himself off. "Follow me and we'll stay out of trouble." He guided them along one of the 5 narrow ledges, all of which led to a grooved and rutted plateau. They stopped for a moment to rest and make plans, but before they had done either, the whole mountain trembled violently and, with a sudden lurch, rose high into the air, carrying them along with it, for quite accidentally they had stepped into the calloused hand of the gelatinous giant. "And what have we here?" he roared, looking curiously at the tiny figures huddled in his palm and licking his lips. He was an incredible size, even sitting down, with long unkempt hair, bulging eyes, and a shape hardly worth speaking of. He looked, in fact, very much like a colossal bowl of jelly, without the bowl. "How dare you disturb my nap?" he bellowed furiously, and the force of his hot breath tumbled them over in his hand. "We're terribly sorry," said Milo meekly, when he untangled himself. "But you look just like part of the mountain." "Naturally," the giant replied in a more normal voice. But even this was like an explosion. "I have no shape of my own, so I try to be just like whatever I am near. In the mountains I am a lofty peak, on the beach a broad sandbar, in the forest a towering oak, and sometimes in the city I'm a very handsome 12-story apartment house. I just hate to be conspicuous. It's really not safe, you know." Then he looked at them with hungry eyes and wondered how well they taste. "You look much too big to be afraid of anything," said Milo quickly, for the giant had already begun to open his mouth wide. "I'm not," he said, with a slight shiver that ran over his gelatinous body. "I'm afraid of everything. That's why I'm so ferocious. If the others found out, I'd just die. Now do be quiet while I eat my breakfast." He raised his hands towards his gaping mouth, and the humbug shut his eyes tightly and clasped both hands over his head. "Then aren't you a really fearful demon?" Milo asked desperately, on the assumption that the giant had been brought up well enough not to talk with a mouthful. "Well, approximately yes," he replied, lowering his arms to the vast relief of the bug. "That is, comparatively no. What I mean is, relatively maybe. In other words, roughly perhaps. What does everyone else think?" "There, you see?" he said peevishly. "I'm even afraid to make a positive statement. So please stop asking questions before I lose my appetite altogether." He then raised his arm again and prepared to swallow the three of them in one gulp. "Why don't you help us rescue Rhyme and Reason? Then maybe things will get better," shouted Milo again, this time almost too late, for in another instant they would have been gone. "Oh, I wouldn't do that," said the giant thoughtfully, lowering his arms once more. "I mean, why not leave well enough alone? That is, it'll never work. I wouldn't take a chance. In other words, let's keep things as they are. Changes are so frightening." As he spoke, he began to look a little bit ill. "Maybe I'll just eat one of you," he remarked unhappily, "and save the rest for later. I don't feel very well." "I have a better idea," said Milo. "You do?" interrupted the giant, losing any desire to eat at all. "If it's one thing I can't swallow, it's ideas. They're so hard to digest." "I have a box full of all the ideas in the world," said Milo, proudly holding up the gift King Azaz had given him. The thought of it terrified the giant, who began to shake like an enormous pudding. "Put me down and just go away," he pleaded, forgetting for a moment who had whom, "and please don't open that box." In another moment he'd set them down on the next jagged peak, and with panic in his eyes, lumbered off to warn the others of his terrible new threat. But news travels quickly. The word snatcher, the trivium, and the long-nosed, green-eyed, curly-haired, wide-mouthed, thick-necked, broad-shouldered, round-bodied, short-armed, bow-legged, big-footed monster had already spread the alarm through the evil, unenlightened mountains. And out the demons came, from every cave and crevice, through every fissure and crack, from under the rocks and up from the mud, stomping and shuffling, slithering, sliding, through the murky shadows. And all had one thought in mind: destroy the intruders and protect ignorance. From where they stood, Milo, Talk, and the humbug could see them moving steadily forward, still far away, but still coming quickly. On all sides the cliffs were alive with this evil collection of crawling, looming, creeping, lurching shapes. Some could be seen plainly, other were but dim silhouettes, and yet still more, only now beginning to stir from their foul places, would be along much sooner than they wanted. "We'd better hurry," barked Talk. "They're sure to catch us," as he started up the trail again. Milo took one deep breath and did the same, and the bug, now that he had knew what lay behind, ran ahead with renewed enthusiasm. Chapter 18. Castle in the Air. Higher and higher they climbed, in search of the castle and the two banished princesses, one from one crest to the next, from jagged rock to jagged rock, up frightful crumbling climb, up frightful crumbling cliffs, and along desperately narrow ledges where a single misstep meant only goodbye. An ominous silence dropped like a curtain around them, and, except for the scuffling of their frantic footsteps, there wasn't a sound. The world that Milo knew was a million thoughts away, and the demons were there in the distance. "They're gaining!" shouted the humbug, wishing he never looked back. "But there it is!" cried Milo at the same instant, for straight ahead, climbing up from atop the highest peak, was a spidery spiral stair, and at the end stood the castle in the air. I see it, said the happy bug as they struggled up the twisting mountain trail. But what he didn't see was that, curled up right in front of the first step, was a little round man in a frock coat, sleeping peacefully on a very large and well-worn ledger. A long quill pen sat precariously behind his ear. There were ink stains all over his hands and his face, as well as his clothing, and he wore a pair of the thickest eyeglasses that Milo had ever seen. "Be very careful," whispered Talk, when they finally reached the top, and the humbug stepped gingerly around and started up the stairs. "Names?" the little man called out, briskly, just as the startled bug reached the first step. He sat up quickly, pulled the book out from under him, put on a green eye shade, and waited with his pen poised in the air. "Well, I stammered the bug. "Names!" he cried again, and as he did, he opened the book to page 512 and began to write furiously. The quill made horrible scratching noises, and the point, which was continuously catching in the paper, flicked tiny ink blobs all over him. As they called out their names, he noted them carefully in alphabetical order. "Splendid, splendid, splendid," he muttered to himself. "I haven't had an M in ages." "What do you want our names for?" asked Milo, looking anxiously over his shoulder. "We're in a bit of a hurry." "Oh, this won't take a minute," the man assured him. I'm the official census taker, and I must have some information before I can take your census. Now, if you'll just tell me when you were born, where you were born, why you were born, how old you are now, how old were you then, how old you'll be in a little while, your mother's name, your father's name, your aunt's name, your uncle's name, your cousin's name, where you live, how long you've lived there, the schools you've attended, the schools you haven't attended, your hobbies, your telephone number, your shoe size, shirt size, collar size, hat size, and the names and addresses of 6 people who can verify all this information, we'll get started. One at a time, please. Stand in line. No pushing, no talking, no peeking." The humbug, who had difficulty remembering anything, went first. The little man leisurely recorded each answer in 5 different places, pausing often to polish his glasses, clear his throat, straighten his tie, and blow his nose. He managed to also cover the distressed bug from head to foot in ink. "Next," he announced very officially. "I do wish he'd hurry," said Milo, stepping forward, for in the distance he could see the first of the demons already beginning to scale the mountain towards them, no more than a few minutes away. The little man wrote with painful deliberation, finally finished up with both Milo and Talk, and looked up happily. May we go now?" the dog asked, whose sensitive note had picked up a loathsome evil smell that grew stronger by the second. "By all means," said the man, agreeably. "Just as soon as you finish telling me your height, your weight, the number of books you've read each year, the number of books you don't read each year, the amount of time you spend eating, playing, working, and sleeping every day, where you go on vacations, how many ice cream cones you eat in a week, how far it is from your house to the barber shop, and which is your favorite color. Then after that, please fill out these forms and applications, 3 copies of each, and be careful, for if you make one mistake, you'll have to do them all over again." "Oh dear," said Milo, looking at the piles of paper. "We'll never finish these." And even as he spoke, the demons swarmed stealthily up the mountain. Come," said the census-taker, chuckling gaily to himself. "Don't take all day. I'm expecting several more visitors any minute now." They set to work feverishly on the difficult forms, and when they had finished, Milo placed them all in the little man's lap. He thanked them politely, took off his eye shade, and put the pen behind his ear, closed the book, and went back to sleep. The humbug took one horrified look back over his shoulder and quickly started up the stairs. "Destination?" shouted the census-taker, sitting up again and putting on his eye shades, taking the pen from behind his ears and opening the book. "But I thought," protested the astonished bug. "Destination," he repeated, making several notations in his ledger. "The castle in the air," said Milo impatiently. "Why bother?" said the census-taker, pointing into the distance. "I'm sure you'd rather see what I have to show you." As he spoke, they all looked up, but only Milo could see the gay and exciting circus on the horizon. There were tents and sideshows and rides and even wild animals. Everything a little boy could spend hours watching. And wouldn't you enjoy a more pleasant aroma? He said, turning to talk. Almost immediately, the dog smelled a wonderful smell that no one but he could smell. It was made up of all the marvelous things that ever delighted his curious nose. And here's something I know you'll enjoy hearing, he assured the humbug. The bug listened with rapt attention to something he alone could hear, the shouts and applause of an enormous crowd, all cheering for him. They each stood as if in a trance, looking, smelling, and listening to the special things that the census-taker had provided for them, forgetting completely about where they were going and who, with evil intent, was coming up behind them. The census-taker sat back with a satisfied smile on his puffy little face as the demons came closer and closer, until less than a minute separated them from their helpless victims. But Milo was too engrossed in the circus to notice, and Talk had closed his eyes, the better to smell, and the bug, bowing and waving, stood with a look of sheer bliss on his face, interested only in the wild ovation. The little man had done his work well, and, except for some ominous crawling noises just below the crest of the mountains, everything was again silent. Milo, who stood staring blankly into the distance, let his bags of gifts slip from his shoulder to the ground. And as he did, the package of sounds broke open, filling the air with peals of happy laughter, which seemed so gay that at first he, then Talk, and then finally Humbug joined in, and suddenly the spell was broken. "There is no circus," cried Milo, realizing he had been tricked. "There were no smells," barked Talk, his alarm now ringing furiously. "The applause is gone," complained the disappointed Humbug. I warned you that I was the census-taker," sneered the census-taker. "I help people find what they're not looking for, hear what they're not listening for, run after what they're not chasing, and smell what isn't even there. And furthermore," he cackled, hopping around gleefully on his stumped legs, "I'll steal your sense of purpose, take your sense of duty, destroy your sense of proportion, and, but for one thing, you'd be helpless yet." "What's that?" Milo asked fearfully. "As long as you have the sound of laughter," he groaned unhappily, "I cannot take your sense of humor, and with it you've nothing to fear from me." "But what about them?" cried the terrified Humbug, for the very instant the other demons had reached the top at last, and were leaping forward to seize them. They ran for the stairs, bowling over the disconsolate census-taker, ledger, ink bottle, eyeshade, and all. As they went, the Humbug dashed up first, then Talk, and lastly Milo, almost too late as the scaly arm brushed his shoe. The dangerous stairs danced dizzily in the wind, and the clumsy demons refused to follow, but they howled with rage and fury, swore bloody vengeance, and watched with many pairs of burning eyes as the three small shapes vanished slowly into the clouds. "Don't look down," advised Milo as the bug tottered upwards on unsteady legs. Like a giant's corkscrew, the stairway twisted through the darkness, steep and narrow with no rail to guide them. The wind howled cruelly in the effort to tear them loose, and the fog dragged clammy fingers down their backs. But up the giddy flight they went, each one helping the other, until at last the clouds parted, the darkness fell away, and a glow of golden sun rays warmed their arrival. The castle gate swung open smoothly. They entered the great hall on a rug as soft as a snowdrift, and they stood shyly waiting. "Come right in, please. We've been expecting you," sang out two sweet voices in unison. At the far end of the hall, a silver curtain parted, and two young women stepped forward. They were dressed all in white and were beautiful beyond compare. One was grave and quiet, with a look of warm understanding in her eyes. The other seemed gay and joyful. You must be the princess of pure reason," said Milo, bowing to the first. She answered simply, "Yes," and that was enough. "Then you are Sweet Rhyme," he said with a smile to the other. Her eyes sparkled briefly, and she answered with a laugh as friendly as the mailman's ring when you know there's a letter for you. "We've come to rescue you both," Milo explained very seriously. "And the demons are close behind," said the worried Humbug, still shaking from his ordeal. "And we should leave right away," advised Talk. "Oh, they won't dare come up here," said Reason gently, "and we'll be down there soon enough." Why not sit for a moment and rest?" suggested Rhyme. "I'm sure you must be tired. How long have you been traveling?" "Days," sighed the exhausted dog, curling up on a large, downy cushion. "Weeks," corrected the bug, flopping into a deep, comfortable armchair, for it did seem that way to him. It has been a long trip, said Milo, climbing onto the couch where the princesses sat. But we could have been here much sooner if I hadn't made so many mistakes. I'm afraid it is all my fault. You must never feel badly for making mistakes, replied Reason quietly, as long as you take the trouble to learn from them. For you often learn more by being wrong for the right reasons than you do by being right for the wrong reasons. But there's so much to learn, he said with a thoughtful frown. That is true, admitted Rhyme. But it's not just learning things that's important. It's learning what to do with what you learn and learning why you learn these things that matters. That's just what I mean, explained Milo as Talk and the exhausted Bug drifted quietly to sleep. Many of the things I'm supposed to know seem so useless that I can't see the purpose in learning them at all. You may not see it now, said the Princess of Pure Reason, looking knowingly at Milo's puzzled face. But whatever we learn has a purpose, and whatever we do affects everything and everyone else, even in the tiniest way. Why, when a housefly flaps its wings, a breeze goes around the world. When a speck of dust falls to the ground, the entire planet weighs a little bit more. And when you stamp your foot, the earth moves slightly off its course. Whenever you laugh, gladness spreads like the ripples in a pond. And whenever you're sad, no one anywhere can really be happy. It's much the same thing with knowledge, for wherever you learn something new, the world becomes that much richer. And so remember also, added the Princess of Sweet Rhyme, that many places you would like to see are just off the map, and many things you want to know are just out of sight, or a little beyond your reach, but someday you will reach them all. For what you learn today, for no reason at all, will help you discover all the wonderful secrets of tomorrow. I think I understand, Milo said, still full of questions and thoughts. But which is the most important? At that moment, the conversation was interrupted by a far-off chopping noise. With each loud blow, the entire room and everything in it shook and rattled. Down below on the murky peak, the demons were busily cutting the stairway loose with axes and hammers and saws. Before long, the whole thing collapsed with a tremendous crash, and the startled humbug leaped to his feet just in time to see the castles drifting slowly off into space. "We're moving!" he shouted, which was a fact that already had become obvious to everyone. "I think we had better leave now," said Rhyme softly, and Reason agreed with a nod. "But how will we get down?" groaned the humbug, looking at the wreckage below. "There's no stairway, and we're sailing higher every minute." Well, time flies, doesn't it?" asked Milo. "On many occasions," barked Talk, jumping eagerly to his feet. "I'll take everyone down." "Can you carry us all?" inquired the Bug. "For a short distance," the dog said the dog thoughtfully. "The princesses can ride on my back. Milo can catch hold of my tail, and you can hang on to his ankles." "But what of the castle in the air?" the Bug objected, not very pleased with the arrangement. Let it drift away," said Rhyme. "And good riddance," added Reason, "for no matter how beautiful it may seem, it's still nothing but a prison." Talk then backed up 3 steps, and with a running start bounded through the window with all his passengers, and began the long glide down. The princesses sat tall and unafraid. Milo held on as tightly as he could, and the Bug swung crazily, like the tail on a kite. Down through the darkness they plunged, to the mountains and the monsters below. 19. Oh, let me get it. Let me take a drink. 19. The Return of Rhyme and Reason. Sailing past 3 of the tallest peaks and just over the outstretched arms of the grasping demons, they reached the ground and landed with a sudden jolt. "Quick!" urged Talk. "Follow me. We'll have to run for it." The princesses still on his back, he galloped down the rocky trail, and not a moment too soon, for pounding down the mountainside, in a cloud of clinging dust and a chorus of chilling shrieks, came all the loathsome creatures who chose to live in ignorance, and who had waited so very impatiently. The thick black clouds hung heavily overhead as they fled through the darkness, and Milo, looking back for just a moment, could see the awful shapes coming closer and closer. Just to the left, and not very far away, were the triple demons of compromise. One tall and thin, one short and fat, and a third exactly like the other 2. As always, they moved in ominous circles, For if one sat here, the other sat there, and the third agreed perfectly with both of them. And since they always settled their differences by doing what none of them really wanted, they rarely got anywhere at all, and neither did anyone they meet. Jumping clumsily from boulder to boulder and catching hold with his cruel, curving claws was a horrible hopping hindsight, was a most unpleasant fellow, whose eyes were in the rear and whose rear was out in front. He invariably leaped before he looked, and never cared where he was going as long as he knew why he shouldn't have gone to where he'd been. And the most terrifying of all, directly behind, inching along like a giant soft-shelled snails, with blazing eyes and wet, anxious mouths, came the gorgons of hate and malice, leaving a trail of slime behind them and moving much more quickly than you'd think. "Faster!" shouted Talk. "Faster!" shouted Talk. "They're closing in." Down from the heights they raced, the humbug with one hand on his hat and the other flailing desperately in the air, Milo running as he had never run before, and the demons just a little bit faster than that. From off on the right, his heavy bulbous body lurched dangerously on spindly legs which barely supported him, came the overbearing know-it-all, talking continuously. A dismal demon who was mostly mouth, he was ready at a moment's notice to offer misinformation on any subject. And while he often tumbled heavy, it was never he who was hurt, but rather the unfortunate person on whom he fell. Next to him, just a little bit behind, came the gross exaggeration, whose grotesque features and thoroughly unpleasant manners were hideous to see, and whose rows of wicked teeth were made only to mangle the truth. They hunted together, and were bad luck to anyone they caught. Right along the back of anyone who carried him was the threadbare excuse, a small pathetic figure whose clothes were worn and tattered, and who mumbled the same things again and again, in a low but piercing voice. "Well, I've been sick, but the page was torn out. But I missed the bus. But no one else did it. Well, I've been sick, but the pages were torn out. I missed the bus, but no one else did it." He looked quite harmless and friendly, but, once he grabbed on, he almost never let go. Closer and closer they came, bumping and jolting each other, clawing and snorting in all their eager fury. Talk staggered along bravely with rhyme and reason. Milo's lungs now felt ready to burst as he stumbled down the trail, and the humbug was slowly falling behind. Gradually the path grew broader and more flat as it reached the bottom of the mountain and turned towards wisdom. Ahead lay the light and safety, but perhaps just a bit too far away. And down came the demons from everywhere, frenzied creatures of darkness lurching wildly towards their prey. From off in the rear, the terrible Trivium and the wobbly gelatinous giant urged them on with glee, and pounding forward with a rush came the ugly dilemma, snorting steam and looking intently for someone to catch on the ends of his long-pointed horns, while his hooves bit eagerly at the ground. The exhausted humbug swayed and tottered on his rubbery legs, a look of longing on his anguished face. "I don't think I can," he grasped as a jagged slash of lightning ripped open the sky, and the thunder stole his words. Closer and closer the demons loomed as the desperate chase neared its end. Then, gathering themselves for one final leap, they prepared to engulf first the bug, then the boy, and then lastly the dog and his two passengers. They rose as one and suddenly stopped, as if frozen in midair, unable to move, staring ahead in terror. Milo slowly raised his weary head, and there in the horizon, for as far as the eye could see, stood the massed armies of wisdom, the sun glistening from their swords and shields, and their bright banners slapping proudly at the breeze. For a moment everything was silent. Then 1,000 trumpets sounded, then 1,000 more, and, like the ocean wave, the long line of horsemen advanced, slowly at first, and faster, until with a gallop and a shout, which was music to Milo's ears, they swept forward towards the horrified demons. There in the lead was King Azaz, his dazzling armor embossed with every letter in the alphabet, and, with him, the mathematician, brandishing a freshly sharpened staff. From his tiny wagon, Dr. Discord hurled explosion after explosion to the delight of the soundkeeper, while the busy din collected them almost at once. And, in honor of the occasion, Chroma the Great led his orchestra in a stirring display of patriotic colors. Everyone Milo had met during his journey had come to help. The men of the marketplace, the miners of Digitopolis, and all the good people from the valley and the forest. The spelling bee buzzed excitingly overhead. "Charge! CHRGE! Charge! CHRGE!" Canby, who, as everyone knew, was as cowardly as can be, came all the way from conclusions to show that he was also as brave. And even Officer Shrift, mounted proudly on a long, low dachshund, galloped grimly along. Cringing with fear, the monsters of ignorance turned in flight and, with anguished cries too horrible to ever forget, returned to the damp and dark places from which they came. Milo and the humbug sighed with relief, and Milo and the princesses prepared to greet the victorious army. "Well done," stated the Duke of Definition, dismounting and grasping Milo's hand warmly. "Fine job," seconded the Minister of Meaning. "Good work," added the Count of Connotations. "Congratulations," proposed the Earls of Essence. "Cheers," recommended the Undersecretary of Understanding. And, since that's exactly what everyone felt like doing, that's exactly what everyone did. "But it's we who should thank," began Milo, when the shouting had subsided, but, before he could finish, they had unrolled an enormous scroll. And, with a fanfare of trumpets and drums, they stated in order that, "Thenceforth, and forthwith, let it be known by all men that time and reason reign once more in wisdom." The two princesses bowed gratefully and warmly kissed their brothers, and they had all agreed that a very fine thing had happened. "And furthermore," continued the proclamation, "the boy named Milo, the dog known as Talk, and the insect henceforth hereinafter referred to as the Humbug, are hereby declared to be heroes of the realm." Cheer after cheer filled the air, and even the bug seemed a bit embarrassed at having so much attention paid to him. "Therefore," concluded the Duke, "in honor of their glorious deed, a royal holiday is declared. Let there be parades through every city in the land, and a gala carnival of 3 days' duration, consisting of jousts, games, feasts, and follies." The 5 cabinet members then rolled up the large parchment, and with many bows and flourishes, retired. Swift horsemen carried the news to every corner of the kingdom, and, as the parade slowly wound its way through the countryside, crowds of people gathered to cheer it along. Garlands of flowers hung from every house and shop and carpeted the streets. Even the air shimmered with excitement, and the shutters closed for many years were thrown open to let in brilliant sunlight and shine where it hadn't shone in so long. Milo Talk and the very subdued humbug sat proudly in the royal carriage with Azaz, the mathematician, and the two princesses, and the parade stretched for miles in both directions. As the cheering continued, Rhyme leaned forward and touched Milo gently on the arm. They're shouting for you, she said with a smile. "But I could never have done it," he objected, "without everyone else's help." "That may be true," said Reason gravely, "but you had the courage to try, and what you can do is often simply a matter of what you will do." "That's why," said Azaz, "there was one very important thing about your question that we couldn't discuss until you returned." "I remember," said Milo eagerly. "Tell me now." "It was impossible," said the king, looking at the mathematician. "Completely impossible," said the mathematician, looking at the king. "Do you mean," stammered the bug, who suddenly felt a bit faint. "Yes, indeed," they repeated together. "But if we told you then, you might have gone. And, as you've discovered, so many things are possible just as long as you don't know they're impossible." And for the remainder of the ride, Milo didn't utter a sound. Finally, when they'd reached a broad, flat plain midway between Dictionopolis and Digitopolis, somewhat to the right of the Valley of Sound, and a little to the left of the Forest of Sight, the long line of carriages and horsemen stopped, and the great carnival began. Gaily striped tents and pavilions sprang up everywhere as the workmen scurried about like ants. Within minutes there were racecourses and grandstands, sideshows and refreshment booths, gaming fields, Ferris wheels, banners, buntings, and bedlam, almost without pause. The mathematician provided a continuous display of brilliant fireworks, made up of exploding numbers which multiplied and divided, with breathtaking results. The colors, of course, being supplied by Chroma and the noise by deliriously happy Dr. Discord. Thanks to the soundkeeper, there was music and laughter, and, for very brief moments, even a little silence. Alec Bing set up an enormous telescope and invited everyone to see the other side of the moon, and the humbug wandered through the crowds, accepting congratulations and recounting in great detail his brave exploits, most of which gained immeasurably in the telling. And each evening, just at sunset, a royal banquet was held. There was everything imaginable to eat. King Azaz had ordered a very special supply of delicious words in all flavors and, for those who liked exotic food, in all languages too. The mathematician had provided innumerable platters of division dumplings, which Milo was very careful to avoid, for no matter how many you ate, when you finished there was more on your plate than when you had began. And, of course, following the meal came songs, epic poems, and speeches in praise of the princesses and the 3 gallant adventurers who had rescued them. King Azaz and the mathematician pledged that every year at the same time they would lead their armies to the Mountain of Ignorance until not one demon remained, and everyone agreed that no finer carnival, for no finer reason, was ever to be held in wisdom. But even things as fine as all that must end sometime, and late on in the afternoon of the 3rd day the tents were struck, the pavilions were folded, and everything was packed and ready to leave. It's time to go now, said Reason, for there is much to do. And as she spoke, Milo suddenly remembered his home. He wanted very much to go back, yet somehow he could not bear the thought of leaving. And you must say goodbye, said Rhyme, patting him gently on the cheek. To everyone? Said Milo unhappily. He looked around slowly at all the friends he'd made, and he looked very hard so as not to forget any of them for even an instant. But mostly he looked at Talk and the Humbug, with whom he had shared so much, the perils, the dangers, the fears, and best of all, the victory. Never had anyone had 2 more steadfast companions. Can't you both come with me? He asked, knowing the answer as he said it. I'm afraid not, old man, replied the bug. I'd like to, but I've arranged a lecture tour which will keep me occupied for years. And they do need a watchdog here, barked Talk sadly. Milo embraced the bug, who, in his most typical fashion, was heard to muffle a gruff bah, but whose damp eyes told quite a different story. Then the boy threw his arms around Talk's neck, and just for a moment held on very tightly. Thank you for everything you've taught me, said Milo to everybody as a tear rolled down his cheek. And thank you for what you've taught us, said the king. And as he clapped his hands, the little car was brought forward, polished like new. Milo got in, and with one last look, started down the road with everybody waved to him. Goodbye, he shouted. Goodbye, I'll be back. Goodbye, shouted Azaz. Always remember the importance of words. And numbers, added the mathematician forcefully. Surely you don't think numbers are as important as words, he heard Azaz shout from the distance. Is that so? Replied the mathematician, a little more faintly. Why, if... Oh dear, thought Milo. I do hope they don't start it all again. And in a moment they had faded from sight, as the road dipped, turned, and headed for home. Chapter 20. Goodbye and Hello. As the pleasant countryside flashed by, and the wind whistled a tune on the windshield, it suddenly occurred to Milo that he must have been gone for several weeks. I do hope that no one has been worried, he thought, urging the car on faster. I've never been away this long before. The late afternoon sun had turned now from a vivid yellow to a warm, lazy orange, and it seemed almost as tired as he was. The road raced ahead in a series of gentle curves that began to look familiar, and off in the distance the solitary toll booth appeared, a welcome sight indeed. In a few minutes he reached the end of his journey, deposited his coin, and drove through, and almost before realizing it, he was sitting in the middle of his own room again. It's only 6 o'clock, he observed with a yawn, and then in a moment he made an even more interesting discovery. And it's still today! I've been gone for only an hour, he cried in amazement, for he certainly never realized how much he could do in so short a time. Milo was much too tired to talk, and almost too tired for dinner, so without a murmur he went off to bed as soon as he could. He pulled the cover around him, took a last look around his room, which somehow seemed very different than he remembered, and then drifted into a deep and welcome sleep. School went very quickly the next day, but not quickly enough, for Milo's head was full of plans, and his eyes could see nothing but the toll booth and what lay beyond. He waited impatiently for the end of class, and when the time finally came, his feet raced his thoughts all the way back to the house. Another trip! Another trip! I'll leave right away. They'll be so glad to see me, and I'll... He stopped abruptly at the door of his room, for where the toll booth had been, just the night before, there was now nothing at all. He searched frantically throughout the apartment, but had vanished just as mysteriously it had come. And in its place was another bright blue envelope, which was simply addressed, "For Milo, who now knows the way." He opened it quickly and read, "Dear Milo, you have now completed your trip, courtesy of the Phantom Toll Booth. We trust that everything has been satisfactory, and hope you understand why we had to come and collect it. You see, there are so many other boys and girls waiting to use it too. It's true that there are many lands you've still to visit, some of which are not even on the map, and wonderful things to see that no one has yet imagined. But we're quite sure that if you really want to, you'll find your way to reach them all by yourself. Yours truly." The signature was blurred and couldn't be read. Milo walked sadly to the window and squeezed himself into one corner of the large armchair. He felt very lonely and desolate as his thoughts turned far away, to the foolish, lovable bug, to the comforting assurance of talk, standing next to him, to the erratic, excitable Din, to little Alec, who he hoped would someday reach the ground, to Rhyme and Reason, without whom wisdom withered, and to the many, many others he would remember always. And yet, even as he thought of all these things, he noticed somehow that the sky was a lovely shade of blue, and that one cloud had the shape of a sailing ship. The tips of the trees held pale yellow buds, and the leaves were a rich, deep green. Outside the window, there was so much to see, and hear, and touch. Walks to take, hills to climb, caterpillars to watch as they strolled through the garden. There were voices to hear and conversations to listen to and wonder. to hear and conversations to listen to and wonder, and the special smell of each day. And in the very room which he sat, there were books that could take you to anywhere, and things to invent, and make, and build, and break, and all the puzzle and excitement of everything he didn't know. Music to play, songs to sing, and worlds to imagine, and then someday to make real. His thoughts darted eagerly about as everything looked new, and worth trying. "Well, I would like to make another trip," he said, jumping to his feet, "but I really don't know when I'll have the time. There's just so much to do right here." And you guys, that is the end of the Phantom Toll Booth. That is the end. We have reached it. We did it. We did it. And it was such a wonderful ending. You guys, it was such a wonderful ending. I absolutely love this book so much. I truly do. I truly do. This is one of my favorite childhood stories, and I'm so happy I was able to share it all with you. And we did it in record time. We did it in our record usual time, and that makes me even happier. I'm so happy that I got the chance to share this with you guys today. How did you guys think of it? Did you guys enjoy it? I really hope that you did. I'm so happy that we were able to finish this story today. And next week there's not gonna be a reading because it's my birthday. It's exactly one more week till my birthday, and I have other things planned for next Tuesday, so we won't be having a reading stream. We won't. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be able to share my birthday with you. I'm so happy I was able to share one of my childhood favorites. I definitely want to share some more books that I love with you guys. I enjoy reading to you guys so very much, and I really hope that you enjoyed this story. My throat's now starting to get a little sore, so I won't stay too long. I'm gonna finish my coffee. What did you guys think? What did you guys think? Have you read this story before? If you have, how do you think I did reading it? I hope I did it justice. I tried voice acting just a little bit, but I'm sorry, I'm not that great. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I promise I'll practice more and I'll get better. But I don't know. Every time we finish a story, I always feel a little bittersweet, because it's like, you did it, but now this journey is over, and but the best thing is we get to start a new one, and I'm so happy to share. I can't wait to share the next journey with you guys. Such a bittersweet feeling, but I love it. I love it. Oh, I'm so happy. I'm so happy to share this with you all so very much. Tomorrow there's not going to be a stream. So I'm gonna take a break, let my throat recover. So that Thursday I can come back with a drawing stream, and we can talk more. I love being able to talk to you guys. I really do. Anytime you guys strike up conversation with me in the chat, it always makes me so happy. It always makes me so happy to be able to connect with you guys. And I don't know. I really treasure these times we spend together. I really do. Always reading a book makes me feel so sentimental. Anyway, but yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope that you guys are keeping cool and taking good care of yourselves. And I'm so happy to be able to share this with you. So, as always, hug your friends. Tell someone you love them. And be a force for good in the world, because goodness knows we need it. And I love you all so very much. I hope everyone has a wonderful Wednesday tomorrow. And I'll see you guys on Thursday for the drawing stream, okay? I love you guys so very much. I'll see you guys next time, okay? Take care. Bye.